Welcome to the Growing Embodiment Podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Harris, a coach, trauma-informed breathwork facilitator, entrepreneur, longtime vegan, and fellow human being. Join me and my guests as we discuss topics ranging from self-growth and personal development to breathwork, healing, relationships, energy, spirituality, and so much more. If you've ever felt like you don't fit in and want to have a safe place to share your thoughts, work through your feelings, and explore different ideas with others who understand, or you're on a journey of self-healing and looking to reconnect with yourself and are just trying to figure out who you are and what you want, then this is the place for you. Come as you are and get ready to connect and find your way back to yourself, as that's what embodiment is all about. So glad to have you here. This is gonna be fun. Now let's get into it. Before we even get into like a podcast interview, I'd like to know a little bit about you and your story. Like, you are so multidisciplinary. How did you pick up on all these different disciplines?
So thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And I'm really excited, for your listeners to just dive in and get what they can. And, so I always tell people, like, take what you can, leave the rest that doesn't resonate with you or serve you in this moment. But I'm all about, and this kind of answers your question a little bit, of like building a multidimensional toolbox. There is not one pill, there is not one modality that will clear everything. And it is this multidimensional approach. And I have come at it from rightly so, it is like written in my star chart that this is my purpose on the planet, is to combine these scientific modalities with these spiritual modalities so that people can use them in a tangible way for quantum healing, for quicker results, for longer results that's more sustainable. And I love what I get to do. Did I always love my journey, how I got here? Now I can do that. But when I was in it, I was in it. And so my background is, my father is a retired neurologist and he is brilliant, which is where my love of brain and neuroscience came from. And I actually was raised, doing rounds with him in the hospital. And he would always show me the MRIs of the brain before I knew anything. And so that was really like the first diagrams I was ever really presented with. And we even had, and I don't usually share this story, so it's interesting that this is coming up, but in the breakfast room where we all would gather together for our meals, there was an actual brain in a glass container that he had had for years. And that was just normal. So I was really raised with like this brain perspective, although I was also raised in the medical model, right? And in America and other places, like that medical model is very systemized and not as diverse as what I would particularly like when we are looking at really healing like trauma or PTSD or anxiety or depression, or even like behaviors or even symptoms like addiction, overeating, hair pulling, skin picking, nail biting. So that's kind of like where I started. But for me personally, how I got here was by me having my own diagnoses, my own traumas. At 12 months old, I stopped breathing and I developed a learning disability. And because of that learning disability, I would get support for all of the years that I was in school, even in my master's program. And it always took me longer to process, which then led me into like the whole sensory processing and how our brain and our body processes information in different ways. And then because of that trauma, I actually started pulling out my hair when I was 12 months old. And it was my first self-soothing behavior. And that discontinued. But I went on this path of, I was a highly sensitive person with a highly sensitive nervous system. That's the bottom line. And got diagnosed, misdiagnosed, doesn't really matter now, but diagnosed as a teenager with major depressive disorder and anxiety. And my parents did everything right. Within the realms of what was available, they did everything right. And my mom was brilliant because she had me in dance. She had me in gymnastics. I did ceramics, which I still do today. And that was my undergrad degree, was like an art therapy type of degree. And it was really a bachelor's of fine arts, but originally wanting to go into art therapy, and it was discontinued while I was there. But I use art therapy as one of the modalities with my clients. And it is transformational when you can combine the science of that with the energy of movement, even if you're doing something like drawing, right? And so I was put on medications way back when, and I would stay on medications for up to, I think, 20 or 25 years. I don't know the exact time frame. And I went through the mental health cycle of being a patient, of having the therapist, trying all the different psychotropics, different medications, tapering on, tapering off, still being depressed, even though I graduated, even though I had this passion, this resiliency that was really cultivated at a very young age, really because of my parents. But it was always this, now I know it was because I was destined to do what I do now. And I went towards drug addiction, anything that would make me feel different, anything that would numb these psychic capabilities and the sensitivities that I had to other people, I would gravitate towards because I had no idea what that was. Even though now, later on in life, my mother and I have these incredibly dynamic conversations about like psychic capabilities and all these different kinds of capabilities that people have to feel others, to hear others, to see others. But until recently, until the last couple of years, I didn't realize that that was in my realm, healing modalities.
Mm-hmm.
And then I worked with a number of different kinds of professionals when all of those and what I hate is that in that traditional model, it's well, you're good enough. Like the good enough factor, that is not where anybody should be living. Like when you're in survival mode, when you've overcome traumas, it makes sense, but that should not be your resting place. It should be the place to move into the place where we get to heal and thrive and learn how to take our power back. And so then I went into healthcare and I began seeing patients in all different kinds of conditions, diagnoses. I've worked with kids, adults, like brain injury, autism, sensory, like all the different ways. And because of my continuing education is how I started gathering all of this data. And I started using it on myself as my own guinea pig. And I'm like, I wonder if I actually didn't have major depressive disorder and anxiety, but if I was just a highly sensitive person and my sensory needs were not getting met in the way that they needed to be. And I wonder if, like I've now been trained in integrative medicine for mental health, which is how to use food and nutrition and other multidimensional like breathwork and energy and yoga to also help heal and give the brain and the body what it needs when it needs it. Not from a damage control place, but from a daily sustainable habits that can create the kind of presence that everybody really dreams of. And so I've now been off of all of my medications for, I think, over 6 years. And I'm also in recovery. Like I don't do drugs anymore. And I've been through all of like the different kinds of recovery. And I've come out on the other end to have the light, to be the guiding light so that people have tangible tools of what comes next. And I transitioned out of healthcare into coaching because I really wanted to use this multidimensional approach rather than the medical model telling me what I can and cannot do with my clients. That's like compacted, but that's really like the gist of it.
Yeah. I'm curious if there was any one particular kind of moment or experience that stood out where you went from a more scientific medical understanding of like the brain being around you, growing up with it, to a more spiritual side. It sounds like you discovered like you're having these conversations with your mom about psychic abilities and other sorts of things. I think we often separate the two. Either your more medical model, more the conscious or, the conscious thinking mind, or we get into the very spiritual, energetic side, and they're kind of treated as two separate things. And you're here in the middle. How did you integrate, or was there something that brought those into balance for you? Because I think a lot of us struggle with finding that balance and not knowing which one to trust or what's misinformation and what's real.
That is a beautiful question. So what has really brought the ability to combine the different modalities, the science and the spirituality, so that it can be balanced rather than like the one or the other, or like the pendulum going from one side to the next, right? My first experience with like really deep spirituality is when I was at a yoga retreat, also again with my mother, when I was about 14 years old. And it was my first experience of floating. And I remember telling her about it. And I always tried to duplicate that with drugs, not realizing that it was in me. And it's interesting because I now know, looking back at like all of the art that I've created. So my undergrad degree was in ceramics and drawing. And I also do light language, with my clients. And some of the light language that I end up doing, like with my hands and in other ways, I actually channeled into my art. And that's actually one of my pieces behind there, one of those drawings. I didn't know that I was doing that. And what I see with my clients is almost every single person that I have in any of my programs, is I have programs for kids, I have programs for adults, and I often work with the moms when I am working with the daughters also. Every single one of them is a highly sensitive person and has these intuitive gifts that they think are liabilities, and that they're not, some of them aren't even aware of them when they start working with me. And so how I've been able to do this is I invested time, money, energy. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there was a pivotal moment. I've always known that there was this energy within me. I always knew that there was something there, but I didn't know how to tap into it. And I joined a mastermind that dealt with like magic, and that activated within me something that you'll never find in traditional like healthcare, right? But the transformational story, I think, really happens when I tapped into my powers even deeper, because I was going into the Akashic records, which is like our soul records that everybody has, past, present, future, everything, for my dog. Within a few months before me having to put her down, because her nervous system was actually completely fragmented and frayed after I moved across the country, got married. She was living in a blended family of like another dog, and they kept getting into dog fights. It was a whole, like, I ended up living in fight or flight and survival mode for a solid 18 months, which was unexpected. But I started doing light language on her, and different techniques that I use in my programs for the humans, I started doing on her. And I just let my intuition guide me. And she kept going through healings. And the purpose was for me to help heal what I could in this 3D form, so that when I did let her transition to her next phase, that she would be more of a healed being, so that she wouldn't carry that with her. And that actually brings us to like some of that intergenerational trauma, right? And how to clear that out. So it's creating this deep trust within myself that I have worked a lot on. It is healing the trauma. When you ask for like the tangible how, it is healing trauma that prevents you from trusting your gut intuition. That's the how. And that gut intuition has everything to do with also the chemicals and the potions and the foods and the movement or the lack of movement and your chakra system and the breath and the energy. Like, it's all, when we clear that out, people's intuition is skyrocketed, which then allows for this quantum healing beyond anything that they thought was possible. And that creates this relational experience of who you are for you, not who you think you need to be for somebody else, or who somebody else has told you you're supposed to be, but this unconditional self-love, this radical self-love of who you are with all your gifts, with all of the old stuff and the new stuff, and being able to integrate it together. And I always tell people, like, it takes support in order to do this. I don't recommend anybody do this on their own, because it's always much easier for somebody who, well, for an outside person to be a little bit more objective, to be a lot more objective on what they hear coming up, because it often looks different than what you think it does. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And it brings up other ones about the thing that I think piqued my curiosity too, is about what is a highly sensitive person? How do you identify as one? Because as you're saying, a lot of people who come to work with you, whether it's the moms, they have these gifts, they're all highly sensitive, and maybe they don't realize it. So that's the first question, is like, well, how do I know if I'm a highly sensitive person? Or just in my own experience, people just tell you to get over things, or, it's not such a big deal. We hear these words, why am I crying? You just need to manage your emotions. And, I guess that a lot of people who are highly sensitive have been told to just manage things a lot better. And then what is intergenerational trauma? Because I think there's a better understanding of what, whether it's big T or small T trauma in our own lifetime. Okay, I can think back to instances where there was trauma, and sometimes we're not even aware of what trauma is, and we carry it. So how do I know about intergenerational if I'm carrying trauma from my parents, my grandparents, going way back? So those are kind of two things that I think a lot of us would benefit from clarity on.
Okay. And I will do my best. Sometimes it is very abstract and esoteric. And one of my personal challenges is like creating that clarity, especially when I come from like that medical model, because a lot of that lingo always wants to come in, which is not always beneficial for most people. Okay. First question. How do you know if you're a highly sensitive person? A, if you think you are, you probably are. That's real basic right there. When we look at the highly sensitive person, this is a person who feels things deeper, who sees things deeper, who notices things in ways that other people don't notice. So I look at it from this, like the auditory, like, are you very aware of all of the sound? And does it interfere, right? Even if it's like a truck on the road. So there's that. It's the visual component. Is it hard for you to concentrate if things are cluttered? That's a visual sensitivity. Do you like things like, if you look at my background, like I love beauty. And it's in my chart. Like I just love Mercury is one of my signs or my ruling planets, Venus. And Venus likes things really pretty, right? And so I have to create this beauty around me for me to feel grounded. That's part of the highly sensitive person. Being highly sensitive to also like the planets and the energies that most people don't actually tap into, but you are dictated by it and you have no idea, right? So the highly sensitive person also, like, we can all understand this because if you get a deep tissue massage and that feeling in your body when the masseuse puts their hands on you in such a way where your entire body just melts, that is your nervous system responding. So the same way that it can melt, it can also get hijacked and alerted, which can move people into fight, flight, freeze, run away, shut down, numb out, in the same way that a deep tissue massage just like makes everything okay, no matter what's going on in your world. I've never really explained the highly sensitive person that way. Another way I would like to explain it is this is the child who may tantrum more, or you may find yourself like more emotionally sensitive. And that's where, like in both of my programs, Superpower program for kids and the emotional resilience for adults, it is learning how to take your power back and harness your sensitivities into superpowers. That is what it is. That's the name of this human game. And one other way with so the highly sensitive person also, I don't know if you're familiar with this term, twice exceptional.
No.
So twice exceptional, if you are familiar with like the autism world or anything like that, that is a very well-known term. But when we use that term to the general public, so the twice exceptional person is somebody who may experience mood behaviors or mood fluctuations. You may even have a diagnosis. You may have, it's neurological based, where you may have, like diagnosable ADD, ADHD, any of those behaviors. And you are also highly sensitive. You have this emotional IQ that you don't know that you have. And so when you have this emotional awareness of when you are taking on other people's emotions, that's what the highly sensitive person does. And they don't realize that what they're feeling is maybe not theirs because they have this openness, literally, to different energies. And it can be just like I talked about, visual, sensory, auditory, taste buds. Like, the highly sensitive person also often gets like GI issues or autoimmune diagnoses because they're highly sensitive. And when you combine that with trauma, big T, little t, doesn't really matter, your body starts storing these emotions and starts wreaking havoc, which can then create these autoimmune disorders that you get diagnosed with and you don't know what to do with. And it never dawned on somebody to be like, hey, when you started having gut issues or stomach pain at 8 years old, what happened to you at 8 years old, right? Nobody, not many, I'm not gonna say nobody. Most people don't make that connection. That's just where my brain goes. And that's one of my gifts. And it always, like every single time, like it always makes sense to them. And then we start unraveling things like people with vision issues who, when we start working together and we start maybe moving some of the trauma, their vision issues start to shift because they've started seeing what they didn't want to see before. So this is where your body literally keeps a record of everything. So does that answer your question in a way that is clear?
Yeah. And I have a curiosity about if this is related to the nervous system at all, too. If you're highly sensitive, does that just mean your nervous system is highly sensitive to, whether it's visual or energetic or auditory, and it gets into this heightened state just more easily than other people?
Yes. And it actually can either get heightened more or dimmed more, just depending on your specific makeup. And it's like also like being more sensitive to sugar, being more sensitive to high fructose corn syrup, being more sensitive to like food dyes, being more sensitive to the cold or to the heat. Like people just don't make those connections, but it all matters. And when we find the formula for the individual person, which is what I have been doing over the last number of years, is really perfecting the formula and the modalities in a way that I can teach it to people and actually start certifying people so that they can also be doing this work with others, so that we can really help heal a population on a global level that really needs deep healing, because the world has gone through multiple traumas. And if you're a highly sensitive person, you feel that. And that's where during the pandemic, I watched so many clients, for example, start pulling out their hair that had never pulled out their hair before. And it's recognizing that you're getting overwhelmed by the overwhelm in the world, which means also you can get very powerful by all the power out there. So it's two-sided, and it's really fun when you start to actually play with this.
Like you say, turning your sensitivities into your superpowers. Because we can either see this from the retractive kind of way or an expansive perspective. And working with you, it seems like it's, flipping that switch of changing the perspective, changing the wiring of your brain even so that you're able to do that. Because doing it on your own, like you said, you should have support when you're doing things like this. And I believe that too, because things are going to come up. You don't know what's going on. You're going to have blind spots, and it's hard to get out of that conscious mind into like the deeper root cause on your own, because you need safety to do that.
Absolutely.
And the one thing that kind of is a curiosity for me from what you're saying, about collectively, which I think gets into intergenerational trauma too. And we went through the pandemic collectively. Is this why we have such high instances of anxiety, depression, mental health disorders right now? Has it always been the case and it just hasn't been diagnosed and now we're diagnosing it? Or has something changed in recent history in our societies that's bringing it to the forefront? I'm just kind of curious about that, your perspective.
I feel like there's three answers to that kind of question. When you ask, like, why are people now getting more diagnosed with mental health challenges or diagnoses? Is it just now coming to the forefront, or has it always been there? So I feel like it's a three-part answer, and there's probably even more parts to answer that through. But like on one side, we are at a certain time in history, in the planet, that intuitive, psychic starseeds are waking up with the purpose of helping the planet to heal. When you wake up, and you wake up those capabilities, there's going to be emotions that come with it because they're just highly sensitive. And so that's part one. Like, I think people are waking up. Part two is, and I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but there's a reason why I'm a coach and no longer in healthcare. When you have diabetes, for example, you go to the doctor, you get a diagnosis, you get a medication, you get maybe a meal plan, and maybe a workout routine. And then you come back and, 3 months later, 6 months later, reassess. Emotional health, mental health was never meant to use that same system. It does not work. But the system we currently have, for the most part, is you get it, you have symptoms, you get a diagnosis, you get a medication, you see a therapist once a week, and you do that for the next 10 years, hoping for the best. That is not a multidimensional approach to healing a human body that is a multi-system body. So that's another reason why there's exponential suicide, anxiety, behaviors, because people who go down that, and I call it the trauma of the healthcare route in the mental health realm, is because we clinicians, unless you're doing like nutritional psychiatry, which beautiful, or integrative medicine for mental health, or functional medicine, right? Like those are the routes to go medically. Also not always covered by insurance because it's not mainstream. And so I do like a combination of all of those. And because we need the somatic movement, we need the mindful movement, the movement medicine. I'm actually about to launch a movement medicine membership group on Facebook for a really inexpensive price because we have to move through it. Like this is the challenge is talk therapy over and over and over, although really beneficial, can re-traumatize the traumatized brain. And most people don't realize that. And there are a group of psychologists worldwide that know that in order to heal that part of the brain, we actually have to get to the right side of the brain, which is the expressive movement-based part. And we literally have to move the energy. And so a lot of my clients, like they end up getting a variety of tools because we're not sitting talking. And there's movement and there's videos and there's all sorts of different kinds of like body activities so that we are not numbing out talking about things because that gets re-traumatized. So that kind of covers like why there's so much out there. And there was a third part that I don't recall now. Well, another component is most people just want a quick fix. And medicine has diagnoses, medicine has side effects and long-term use of medication. I actually started developing a pretty significant tremor from my long-term use of my antidepressant and anxiety medication, which is what started to prompt me to look at how do I start to decrease this? Not even thinking that getting off of it was going to be anywhere in my realm of possibility, by the way. And we've missed the boat in these pharmaceuticals, providing the neurotransmitter support that the brain needs when it's not enough. And most people, because of that medical model, want a pill, go to the therapist, and they will get all better. And that's just not the way it works. And so I invite people to take their power back so that it doesn't necessarily mean you will never need medicine again. But I offer a safe supplement protocol in all of my programs that is directly specific to neurotransmitter support and gut health, because that gut-brain connection is greater than anything possible. And this is, so for people who are going down this route, you can take your medicine, you can go to the therapist once a week. If you are living on soda and candy, your emotional health, your emotions are not going to get better. It's a mismatch. It's incongruent. And most people don't want to change their diet. So I help them do that in a very safe, simple way that is easy and sustainable. So it doesn't freak people out because people are very attached to their food.
Yeah. So it's almost like if we have a big pie, the medical model is, you're not saying like medication is the end all and be like, it's the worst, it's the devil itself. And we
No,
can
not
never
at
take
all.
it. There's a place for it in this pie, but we're missing all these other parts about nutrition, environmental toxins, and so many other support. And we're looking at this, and maybe we're looking at like 10%, and we're leaving 90%, and people aren't seeing the results that they want, or it takes an extremely long time because we're missing out on all these other things. And with the way, things are now with people waking up, they're becoming more highly sensitive. We don't have the support to help with the 90%. So instead, people are just like left scratching their head of, well, I went to the doctor gave me the medication, I'm going to my therapist, I'm doing all the things, but it's because the system isn't matching what's actually the root cause. Right now, we're like putting a Band-Aid on a cut, not realizing that the cut is infected and, we could get blood poisoning or something. The issues could get worse and worse. Instead, like, let's peel the Band-Aid back and look at what the individual has going on. What is actually happening to their specific cut rather than trying to slap one solution on everyone. That's what it sounds like is kind of happening here.
You explained that beautifully. It's not getting or using the Band-Aid. That's exactly right. And I've been doing this long enough to know the things that work. And then it's those little nuances that is unique to each person. but there is a global, roadmap that makes all the difference in the world. But when you go down that path that you're mentioning and doing it for, years and years and years, what happens to your psyche is that you're broken and you're helpless and it's never going to get better. So what's the point? Which then leads to suicidal ideation and other behaviors. And so it's not that like somebody's suicidal. No, it was a whole roadmap before they got there.
Yeah.
That's where it's crucial, because a lot of highly sensitive people go down that roadmap and they find themselves in that place and they don't know what to do. And so in a number of the parents in the superpower program, the kids are just so tired. And I love catching them before they go into that standard of care cycle so that they don't get traumatized there, because that's its own unique kind of trauma. Like if the medical professionals can't help me, then what does that mean?
Yeah. There's something wrong with me.
Right. And a lot of the kids that I work with, they love working with me because I understand that. And I went down that cycle and I still got my degrees. I still did amazing things. It was also still really hard. But once you get out of that, it is easier to use the tools that are going to support your body and your brain and your nervous system. Even if you find yourself going back into that kind of place, it doesn't mean you'll never be there again, because we are human. We are meant to have emotions. We're meant to be angry. We are meant to feel it. And we have to feel it, not suppress it. And we have to feel it in a safe way so that our nervous system doesn't get all freaked out.
And I think that's partially what people are afraid of.
Yeah.
Because they understand the Band-Aid model. I get a cut, I put a little ointment on it, maybe I put a Band-Aid. All right, I've done my part. But to remove the Band-Aid now, like, well, what do I do? I'm not sure. There's fear there. And then when we're talking about emotions too, it gets even more complicated, because we often aren't taught how to express our emotions, or we're taught more to suppress our emotions, or we're taught to fear our emotions or be overwhelmed by them, or, we have all these stories, and it becomes easier to numb them out, to project them, to do all these things, get the coping mechanisms, which will only work for so long. It's like you're saying with the good enough, like we're just kind of coasting by, numbing out with Netflix or food or drugs or alcohol or, whatever behaviors like you were mentioning too, skin picking, hair pulling, all these things to just get through the day. Whereas there's other options available. But I think people either don't know those options are available, or they fear them, or they don't think that they can afford them, because like you said, they're not covered by insurance. Even here in Canada, in our medical system, I've seen functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, integrative doctors, not part of our mainstream medical coverage either. So how do we move forward as a society, in your opinion? I know, big question.
Yeah. How do we move forward in this society? You find the person that resonates for you. You invest fearlessly because you know you're worth it, and because you know that you are meant for more, and because you know that you have gifts to give to the world. And as we do that, we teach our family members and our colleagues and our clients that they can do it too. We give ourselves permission to do it. We give others permission to do the same. And that was kind of a loaded question that you asked, because I'm in the very beginning stages of creating a certification program so that I can teach other people, even breathwork facilitators. It's really teaching other people my system so that we can heal more with more masses. Because I have a waiting list for my kid program. I am maxed out with the one-to-ones. And so my emotional resilience group program and my reconnect group program is still enrolling people. But for one-to-one, I'm doing as much as I can. And that's also part of the answer, is we do our part. And we do our part no matter what it is. And when we hit a roadblock, I have my own coaches. I invest the way that I ask my clients to invest, with money, time, and energy. When we hit a roadblock, we show up for ourselves, and we don't let it take us out. And we see that roadblock as an opportunity for deeper healing. When we remove that Band-Aid, the cut that Band-Aid was covering can heal, right? If you keep a Band-Aid on long term, it will get gross inside.
Yeah.
Like if it doesn't heal and there's something deeper there, it gets gnarly, right? And then we get like necrotic dead tissue and other things like that. So we hold on to the hope and the inspiration that other people's story can be your story, that my story can be somebody else's story. And we grab onto the supports that are there to help us navigate. For example, I think back to like my mom and my dad. And as I've gotten older and in different programs and different higher education, you know, the instructors, the professors, different teachers, now it's different coaches that light me up, that speak to where I'm at, while gently pushing me forward outside my comfort zone because I know I can. And the more we do that, the easier it gets.
Mm-hmm. It's like the ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
You work on yourself, which influences the people around you, which influences others, and
yes,
it grows.
That's exactly right.
Beautiful. Well, I know that was a loaded question. Is there anything that you would like to leave the listeners with? Any final thoughts or?
Before we have like the final thought, I would love to touch on your final question before, which was about intergenerational trauma. And I will make this very brief. There is scientific research out there proving that when you are in utero, there's a specific time when you have the genetic makeup and DNA and the imprinting from the mom and the grandmother, like 3 different generations all at once. And what happens is most people don't know that, and they don't realize how that affects them on their daily basis. So many of my clients, and it's not just from the mother, but it's like the mother wound, the father wound, all these different things, but it happens generationally, so that core issues that someone may have may not actually belong to them. And for example, I'll share a quick little story. One of my clients, significant mental health diagnoses, trauma. And as we were working together, I realized, knowing her family's history as well, and it's really significant for mental health, and even like the grandmother and the great grandmother, and something happened and she's like, I don't want to be this way. And it was just an obvious, like, this actually isn't yours. And when we can go into the breath work, the energy work, the Akashic records, break those core contracts that no longer serve us. I mean, I did this yesterday with one of my clients, and he's like showing up in a whole brand new way. And I mean, it's just, that's the quantum healing. When you can find somebody who can get to that kind of place and make that identification, and then you start noticing and having this increased awareness of where you're showing up in a pattern that actually doesn't really align with you, it's often coming from somebody else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I didn't know about the, in vitro or in utero with the different generations. Fascinating.
It's fascinating. It is so fascinating. Yeah. But
I have experienced myself and with clients patterns showing up that aren't your own beliefs, that you're like, that's not mine that I'm carrying. So it is interesting to see how things show up in our lives that aren't even our own. But I think people are maybe.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say this is where maybe the victim kind of comes on of like, oh, now I don't have to just heal my own stuff. I have to heal generations. It's exhausting. Or maybe that's just me.
I think that you know what? It's funny that you say that, because I actually see it as much easier. Like if it's not coming from you, it's how you're integrating that information. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's actually much easier, because you can be like, oh, this isn't mine anymore. And so how do you start operating differently from that different perspective? And that's the brain rewiring.
I'll have to look into your programs, see how to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so final thoughts. What would I want to leave somebody with for your listeners? That no matter where you are, there's always progress that can be made, and to not give up on yourself, and to try all the different kinds of tools, and to find the ones that work for you, not the ones that you think you should do, but the ones that really fill you up and fuel you. And if one tool doesn't work one time, try it again in a different way, because the intensity, the duration, all matters. And so it actually may be a fantastic tool, just maybe using it differently. And I'll end with this, like, for example, a tangible thing to do. In my programs, I do a lot of like audio recordings, and I'll make it all pretty with music and everything. And it's very ethereal, and I love listening to them. When you can take that to the gym or your rowing machine or your Peloton and put that energy into the movement, that's movement medicine. Rather than grinding the exercise out to have a fit body, it's actually moving the energy around. And so that's actually a tangible tool that like anybody can do. It shifts the movement in a very dynamic way.
Movement medicine. I like that, rather than, like you said, just to get a fit body. There's a deeper purpose here, and our bodies do carry so much.
Yeah, because then you're not coming from a place of lack, like wanting to get skinnier or shed weight. You're coming from this place of actually healing and filling your body up. So it's a completely different perspective than energy. It makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah. A lot more fun, a lot more empowering. It's not that there's something wrong with my body as it is. It's just building it up, like you said.
Yeah. Building up your body and your brain at the same time.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I feel like we could keep talking forever.
Oh, you are so, so welcome. If anybody is interested in like reaching out on Instagram, it's holistic.medical.healing. And my website is holisticmedicalhealing.com. And if anyone has any questions about anything, just like message me, DM me, contact me through my website. I am happy to answer.
And I'll put all the links in the description box as well.
Perfect. Right. It was so nice meeting you, and it was so nice talking with you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Growing Embodiment podcast. I'd love to connect, and you can find us on all social media platforms at Growing Embodiment. Please also join our Facebook community, the Growing Embodiment community. We'd love to have you there. And the one thing that I ask is, if you found value in this podcast, please share it with a friend, like, follow, all that beautiful stuff. I can't wait to see you next week. Until then, have a wonderful day.